The Oracl3 Network.
I'm Edward October, and I'm here at the Octoberpod Ranch in the Great Smoky Mountains. Almost every night here, there's a ghost story party around the campfire. In my family, we believe that scary stories are best told around a roaring fire with a bottle of wine. That's why bold individualists everywhere choose Octoberpod for their retro horror thrills. Our stories are so good because they're told with such care, understated, moody, and, above all, chilling. Why don't you join us? For retro horror of impeccable taste, choose Octoberpod. Find us on YouTube or at Octoberpod VHS.com. Octoberpod, retro horror for bold individualists.
Hey, Rainbow Warriors. This is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for young children, and maybe not even for some adults. I tend to swear like a sailor, and I'm kind of proud of that. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors, and welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. If you can tell a friend about this show, I would sure appreciate it. I believe it's important to get the word out on these cases and have the victims' voices heard. And if you can possibly give me a good rating where you listen to your podcast, that would be magnificent. You see, when podcasts get 5-star ratings, it helps algorithms in the podcast world and therefore visibility. So I appreciate it big time. It's episode 75! Woohoo! That means this is the last episode for season 5. And this episode's case is a crazy one. A good episode to end the season with for sure. And by the time you hear this, I'll be researching away and writing up new cases for season 6. Find me on the socials, Facebook and Instagram at Beyond the Rainbow Pod. And Twitter, Tumblr, and TikTok at Rainbow Crimes. On my website, you can find 2 great ways to help support this show. I have a link to my merch store at TeePublic. For every shirt, mug, or any item purchased at the Rainbow Crimes storefront, a portion comes back to me and goes into my podcasting fund. And eventually I'll be able to afford some new podcast equipment. My Buy Me a Coffee link can also be found on the website. I kind of really like the Buy Me a Coffee site. The site offers listeners a way to make a small one-time donation for the price of a cup of coffee. And even if you don't want to buy me a cup of coffee, I'm using this site kind of like a blog, and I've written up some short stories about true crime. And it doesn't cost you a thing if you just want to go look at the posts that I've made. You can even sign up on the mailing list, so when I do drop a new post, you get notified. My website is beyondtherainbowpodcast.com. Also on my website, you can see the ever-growing list of missing but not forgotten LGBTQ+ people. This episode's missing but not forgotten is Brianna Weiszinski. Brianna is a 17-year-old trans female from New London, Connecticut. She's not been seen since October 13th, 2020. Her flyer on NamUs has her misgendered and dead named. They call her a white male and by her birth name of Brandon. Brianna's phone last pinged in New Jersey, but it's disconnected now. It's thought that Brianna might be headed for Texas. Sadly, Brianna is a habitual runaway. She has shoulder-length brown hair and it's parted in the middle. She has hazel eyes. Brianna stands 5'11" and weighs between 150 and 175 pounds. She does get mild facial hair, but she's pretty good about shaving the hair above her lip. She has 2 tats on her chest, a heart, and the name Lisa, Love, and Memory. The clothing she last was seen in were blue jeans and a white Tommy Hilfiger jacket. If anyone should have information about Brianna, please contact the New London Police Department at area code 860-447-5269. Does anyone else remember the movie Single White Female? It was a 1992 movie starring Bridget Fonda and Jennifer Jason Leigh. Basically, this plain young woman became obsessed with another young woman. She wanted to be her, and everything just got really weird between them. I remember this movie kind of freaked me out. Not because I actually thought anyone wanted to be obsessed with me or steal my life, but because I would have never thought anything like this could happen. But it does. And since then, the phrase single white female has been coined to describe a woman who seems kind of stalkerish to another one. Katherine Brown, who was an odd woman, joined a good portion of people in Charleston, South Carolina, who absolutely loved a Southern belle named Mary Lynn Witherspoon. But we'll get back to Katherine a little bit later. It certainly wasn't hard to love Mary Lynn. She was easy on the eyes, she was patient, and she was a sweet, caring woman. As a teenager, Mary Lynn competed a lot in beauty pageants. Many times she'd win. She was a straight-A student and she graduated valedictorian of her high school. Mary Lynn had so much going for her. She even married a doctor. But Mary Lynn's life wasn't 100% perfect, though it might sound that way. Her marriage didn't last too long before a divorce was inevitable. One thing the marriage did produce was the gift of a daughter. After the divorce, Mary Lynn had no shortage of potential suitors. One was a man, now hold tight, this is quite the name. His name was Edmunds Tennant Brown III, and she met him in 1981. They started dating, and soon it evolved into a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. The relationship between the couple was pretty good for almost a decade, other than the fact Edmund's daughter Molly and Mary Lynn's daughter Jane didn't like each other one bit, and they were about the same age. I want to say they were about 8 years old. Edmunds also had a son, a 10-year-old son, and he was the kid was kind of creepy. Edmunds was wonderful to Mary Lynn's daughter Jane. Some even said he was better to Jane than he was to his own children. Edmunds asked Mary Lynn to marry him, and she had to decline the offer for the good of the kids. Mary Lynn also treated Edmund's children well, especially the boy, and I think that's because Mary Lynn possessed nurturing mother and teacher characteristics, which is why she went on to become a French teacher. As a teacher, Mary Lynn saw all kinds of kids day in and day out. She was used to all different kinds of personalities within the kids she taught, and this gave Mary Lynn a natural empathy for Edmund's son. The kid was just really socially awkward and not well liked by his peers at all. Edmund's son shared his father's name. He too was Edmunds Tennant Brown IV, but the boy went by his middle name of Tennant. Edmunds and Mary Lynn were together for 10 years. 8 of those years, Edmunds kept asking Mary Lynn to marry him, and she kept declining. So the two broke off their relationship. As much as Mary Lynn cared about Edmunds and maybe even loved him, she just didn't feel like Edmund's kids were a good fit for her and Jane. Even after the breakup, Tennant, the once creepy boy now becoming a creepy young man, he'd still have contact with Mary Lynn. Tennant had a fascination with Mary Lynn. No, actually I'm wrong. Tennant had an obsession for Mary Lynn. Some of it might have come from the fact that Tennant felt that his dad loved Mary Lynn and Jane more than him, Or possibly it was because Mary Lynn had always been so nice to Tennant and showed him kindness and understanding. Tennant yearned to be loved by people, but he simply rubbed people wrong, and therefore most people wouldn't even speak to him. Mary Lynn was one of the only people in Charleston that would actually speak to Tennant. As a result, Tennant would just show up at her house whenever he wanted to. He'd just stand in her driveway and look at the house, or he'd sit in front of the house on his bicycle and stare. Sometimes he'd even walk up to her porch and just stand there watching the house. Mary Lynn would talk to him, but cautiously, and she never invited him inside. She was pleasant to Tennant, but not overly so. She didn't want to encourage this behavior with him. Mary Lynn and Jane even briefly moved away from Charleston to Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Again, Tennant found Mary Lynn's new address, and he would just show up on her porch. Friends told Mary Lynn she should report him to the police, and she should get a restraining order on Tennant. But Mary Lynn wasn't trying to get him in any trouble, so she just chose to live with it. Eventually, Mary Lynn moved back to Charleston. There was a day in 1989 Mary Lynn was visiting her mom a few hours away. She was getting ready to leave after spending a couple days with her mom, and her mom decided to go for a walk before Mary Lynn left. When they got back to Mary Lynn's mom's house, they realized that the house appeared to be broken into. Upon inspection, they couldn't find anything that had been taken, so they kind of just shrugged it off. When Mary Lynn got home from her trip, she opened her suitcase. She noticed that things were missing. It seemed that someone who had broken into her mom's house had stolen Mary Lynn's makeup and clothes from inside her suitcase. Mary Lynn called her mom and told her about this. Her mom got on the phone and called up Tennant. She told him she knew he got into her house and stole her daughter Mary Lynn's makeup and clothing, and he'd better return them if he knew what was good for him. Again, Mary Lynn refused to press charges against Tennant. She just regarded him as an annoyance, but she really didn't want to create any problems with him. In 1991, all of a sudden, Mary Lynn's life became really quiet and serene. Tennant stopped bothering her. He was no longer showing himself to be part of her life. Mary Lynn began to unclench her butt cheeks. And if you're unfamiliar with that term, clenching your butt cheeks is my expression for the feeling I get when something makes me cringe, or if something or someone makes me feel really uncomfortable. I'm assuming that Tennant made Mary Lynn clench her butt cheeks anytime he was around. Years began to pass and there was still no sign of Tennant anywhere. In 2001, Tennant appeared again, this time in Mary Lynn's backyard. It had been 10 years since Mary Lynn had seen Tennant. Mary Lynn, still not wanting to cause problems with Tennant, would again not call the police. Yes, he was trespassing, but other than that, he really wasn't doing anything wrong. In April 2003, Mary Lynn went into her garage to get some of her clothes out of the clothes dryer. When she opened the door to the dryer, she saw that all of her underwear were missing. She was positive it was Tennant. "Mary Lynn, call the damn police already and file a report." But nope, Mary Lynn didn't. She did have an alarm system installed into her house, and she went to the gun shop. She asked what the best but mildest way to protect herself would be. The gun shopkeeper suggested pepper spray, and Mary Lynn went home with just that. A little pepper spray container for her keychain. Her alarm company had also given her a little key fob with a panic button. This was also to put on her keychain. In June of 2003, Tennant again was in Mary Lynn's backyard. She had just got home from the school she taught at. She told Tennant, "Can't talk right now, I'm on my way to a PTA meeting." And then she went into her house, changed her clothes, and left. The very next day, Tennant was again in her backyard. This time, he held a pillowcase stuffed full of Mary Lynn's clothing. He seemed to be teasing her. Maybe tormenting her is a better way to put it. Mary Lynn, who was now in her early 50s, just couldn't anymore with this guy. Tennant, a 31-year-old stalkerish man, a man she had known since he was a little boy, was driving her nuts. Mary Lynn finally dialed the police. The police picked up Tennant and they charged him with burglary. A background check on Tennant showed that he spent time in the Coast Guard and he had some other criminal charges on file, like Grand Theft Auto and breaking and entering, which also might explain why Tennant disappeared for the 10 years and wasn't stalking Mary Lynn during that time. Since Tennant no longer had a relationship with his father and sister, there was no way he was going to make bail for this new burglary charge. He was just going to have to sit there in jail and await his trial. Knowing eventually Tennant would be out in society again, Mary Lynn prayed hard that Tennant would not retaliate against her or her family. Along with her prayers, she enrolled in a victims notification system. So when Tennant was released or moved to another facility, Mary Lynn would be notified via a phone call and a letter giving her ample warning where Tennant would be. Mary Lynn started to relax again, and she kicked back and enjoyed her summer before she had to start teaching again in fall. No one had a clue Mary Lynn's vacation from Tennant wasn't going to last very long. On November 15, 2003, Mary Lynn's school called her daughter Jane, who by now was married and lived a few hours away. The school told Jane Mary Lynn didn't show up at school that day, and she didn't call a substitute to take over her classes either. As dedicated and responsible as Mary Lynn was, this was completely out of character for her. Jane asked the principal of the school to go to her mother's home to check on her. When the principal and another teacher showed up at Mary Lynn's house, Mary Lynn's car was gone. She appeared to be out. So they called Jane back and told her this fact. Still worried about her mother, Jane and her husband got into their car and began their journey to Mary Lynn's home. Jane also called the police and asked them to make a welfare check to her mom's house. She also gave them permission to break into the house if necessary. The police did as they were instructed by Jane. When they were inside Mary Lynn's home, they got a weird feeling. There was a half-eaten plate of eggs on the counter. There was an apple, some jewelry, and a woman's watch on the floor. They walked further into the house to some of the other rooms. In one room, drawers were pulled out from a dresser and the items were strewn about. Upstairs in the second-floor bathroom, they found a deceased Mary Lynn in the bathtub. She was naked, she had been raped, and her hands and feet were bound with tape. It appeared she had been strangled by something and there was a knife laying near her. Also laying near Mary Lynn's body was a wallet of a neighbor, a woman named Elizabeth Brackett. Police went to check on Elizabeth Brackett. They feared something deadly might have happened to her as well. Elizabeth Brackett was found safely in her home. She said she had heard some type of noise the night prior between 11:30 and 12:30, and when she got up in the morning to look for her wallet, it was gone. Jane thought Tennant looked good for this. But wasn't Tennant still in jail? It seemed an automated call was sent to Mary Lynn's home phone. It stated Tennant was being moved to another correctional facility. Yet the information was incorrect. Tennant was released. Remember at the beginning of this episode, I promised you we'd get back to the single white female of the story? And here I have been just blabbing about Edmund's son Tennant, and I haven't told you really anything about Katherine Brown. Or have I, warriors? Edmund's Tennant Brown IV is Katherine's dead name. And during this time in 2003, Katherine, formerly known as Tennant, had been taking transitional female hormones. Katherine is a trans woman. I held off as long as I could from telling you the plot twist, warriors. I was thoroughly floored by it when I read about this case. And even though right after Mary Lynn's murder, Tennant still refers to himself as him and Tennant, I'm going to start referring to Tennant as her and Katherine. Not as much out of respect to Tennant, because let's face it, he's a douchebag, but out of respect for trans people as a whole. Like bad accidents you can't turn away from, a lot of times when a violent crime happens in a neighborhood, there's a ton of looky-loos. Neighbors and curiosity seekers who want to know what's going on. Mary Lynn's murder was no different. Droves of people showed up on Trad Street where Mary Lynn's house was located. One of these looky-loos just happened to be Katherine. A picture of Tennant Brown was shown to officers as a person of interest in the murder. An observant officer spotted and stopped Katherine, who identified himself as Tennant Brown. Soon, a detective joined the officer and Katherine. The detective started asking Katherine questions. And that's when Katherine said she wanted an attorney, so the detective couldn't ask any more questions. But on Katherine's person was a set of keys belonging to Mary Lynn. The keys had her pepper spray and panic button for her alarm system on it. This little item earned Katherine a handcuff ride down to the police station. When the police got Katherine's driver's license out, they noticed something. Katherine's address read the same as Mary Lynn's address. Katherine had been using Mary Lynn's home address as her own. And the kicker? Katherine was even wearing a pair of Mary Lynn's underwear and a pair of her pants. Finally, Mary Lynn's car was found. In the car were scraps of paper with what appeared to be Katherine practicing Mary Lynn's signature. Katherine didn't just want Mary Lynn. Katherine wanted to be Mary Lynn. In Katherine's mind, the only way for her to be Mary Lynn was to kill Mary Lynn. This makes me believe Katherine was pretty fucked up in her head if she thought no one was going to miss Mary Lynn and she could just take over Mary Lynn's life. Katherine was also using Mary Lynn's credit cards. She ordered a breast form online. Breast forms are rubber or silicone overlays, and they're worn by many drag queens. Possibly they're worn by women who have had to have mastectomies. And they're even worn by some trans women when their breasts aren't growing fast enough while on female hormone treatments. Katherine also had ordered a wig, men's makeup, and a video on drag queens. The police were a little bit stunned when these boxes were delivered to Mary Lynn's porch, and then they opened them and these goodies were inside. The police also found a strange manifesto of sorts in Mary Lynn's car. The manifesto was just kind of a wad of stacked papers. There were phone numbers to doctors that perform gender reassignment surgeries. In it was a letter where Katherine tells how she has yearned to physically be a woman for such a long time. Which might have you asking, why did Katherine rape Mary Lynn? Well, as we all know, rape isn't about sexual gratification in most cases. It's about control, anger, and violence. It's thought the rape of Mary Lynn was just that. Control, anger, and violence. It was also Mary Lynn's punishment for turning on Katherine and reporting her to the police. Katherine had just been released from jail 5 days prior to killing Mary Lynn. During that time she was incarcerated, she started to write her manifesto. It included exactly how she was going to kill Mary Lynn and take over her life. Mistakes were definitely made by the jailers that held her. First, in the error of the automated message to Mary Lynn's phone stating inmate Edmund Tennant Brown IV was being relocated to another correctional facility, when in fact he was being released. And second, by no one asking to see the stack of papers Katherine was leaving the jail with. Had someone even asked, they might have been able to save Mary Lynn's life. Legally, I guess they couldn't force the soon-to-be-released inmate to show the papers to him, but they could have at least asked. While in jail, Katherine did have to see a mental health counselor. Katherine was said to suffer from bipolar disorder and gender dysphoria. That was yet another mistake made. A mental health counselor assisting in the release of this individual should have been able to see this individual was clearly mentally ill, and it wasn't from gender dysphoria. The DNA came back conclusively pointing to Katherine as Mary Lynn's killer. Katherine went to trial, pleaded guilty, and she was convicted of the premeditated murder of Mary Lynn Witherspoon. Katherine was sentenced to life without parole. She most likely would have received the death penalty, but Mary Lynn's family wanted to avoid the trial as much as possible. It was just too hard on them. However, Mary Lynn's sister and daughter did get together with lawmakers, and they got a bill passed called Mary Lynn's Law. Mary Lynn's Law improved the victim's notification system. As well, the law enforces stricter punishments on stalkers. As for Katherine Brown, she sits behind bars making demands of the prison system. Currently, she's demanding the state to pay for her gender reassignment surgery, and that's kind of a problem. Gender reassignment surgery is illegal in the state of South Carolina. To me, gender reassignment surgery is akin to abortions. It all comes down to lawmakers and Bible thumpers shouldn't be able to tell people what to do with their own damn bodies. But to be honest with you, I'm not so sure any state or prison system, which is essentially taxpayers' money, should have to pay for any incarcerated criminal's gender reassignment surgery or abortion. For killer Katherine to have to live in a body she's not comfortable in, it extends her punishment, and I'm kind of here for it. Personally, I'd rather my taxpayer money go to a law-abiding person who needs that kind of surgery. Fuck Katherine. Okay, Rainbow Warriors, are you ready for a quickie? A quickie crime. Remember, I'm doing those now. Our quickie this episode comes to us from Hitchcock, Oklahoma. Back in 2016, Randy Gamble Medler and his husband, two gay white men, and their adopted 7-year-old black son moved to Hitchcock. Randy immediately got involved in the town's political scene. He was hoping to make a change for the better. He befriended the locals, and he became the town clerk. The town clerk's position is responsible for the town census, helping to orchestrate elections, issuing permits and licenses, etc. But unfortunately, taking this position made Randy and his family a target in this little hillbilly redneck town, because this town found out Randy had a husband and a black child. Now remember, this happened in 2016. This was when the ugly orange dude was running around and campaigning his hateful agendas. Little did we know he'd actually be voted into office, and then the hate would get worse. But this little redneck town of what I'm sure are a bunch of MAGA supporters got downright vile with Randy and his family. It started September of 2016. when a town trustee looked at Randy and asked him,
"What are you going to do when your house is burning and nobody's going to send a fire truck?"
Early in 2017, Randy was driving somewhere to clear an obstructed road. When he was at a stop sign, a woman started to scream at him, and she tried to get into his car. Thankfully, his doors were locked. She was yelling at him, "You fucking queer! I'm gonna grab your little boy, rip off his Nigeria head, and shit down his throat!" Can you just fucking imagine how scared Randy must have been? He tried to file a police report on both of these threats, but the sheriff's office refused to take the report, and he told him that those people were protected under free speech rights. The sheriff also told media,
"We don't take kindly to being called racists and homophobes, 'cause we're not."
What? Seriously, you're not? Small towns like this need an attitude adjustment, like a 1,000,000-man march and a big pride parade right down Main Street all at the same time. Not long after that, people would walk by Randy's home and they'd throw gravel at it. Someone even posted a sign at the town's post office. It stated the town clerk is a fucking queer. But they're not racist and homophobes. On May 28, 2017, Randy and his family were in bed. Randy heard glass breaking in his garage. He got up to discover that his house was on fire. He was able to get his husband and their son safely out of the house. All the while, his neighbors, including the police chief, got lawn chairs, and they put the chairs in front of Randy's house so they could sit and watch the home burn. Hitchcock's fire department was just a block away from Randy's home, but they didn't arrive to the house until it was completely burnt. This whole lawn chair thing reminded me of the series called Them on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really good. It's about a black family that moves into an all-white neighborhood in the 1950s, and the neighborhood white women would set up lawn chairs in front of the black family's house, and they'd sit there and watch the house just to intimidate the black family. I don't know why people are so fucked up. Randy and his family were forced to find somewhere else to live. Hopefully they have found a safer, more welcoming place. Love you, Rainbow Warriors. Remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.